Good morning. How is everybody doing in ChiroSecure land? This is Dr. Drew Rubin. I'm excited to be with you today to talk to you about another episode so we can present to me what's one of the most important concepts, which is dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. It's a very interesting new concept coming out of Europe. This is Pavel Kolar's textbook, Clinical Rehabilitation, that I got this information from. Important to understand before I continue, and I always make sure people get this, is we're not back doctors, we're not bone doctors, we're not spine doctors. We are nerve system specialists. So I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we go along with this. Even though Dr. Kolar is a physical therapist, I want you guys to keep in mind what we are looking for is not just changes in muscles and how muscles are moving, etc. It's really how the nerve system is working. But this is still very good information. And I think what I really like that they've come up with is something called developmental kinesiology. So there are 3 levels of motor control in the assessment and treatment of the motor system. And what they're going to talk about in the motor control is I'm going to show you some pictures in a moment, a poster or 2 posters that these guys have made up. And what it shows is how a baby, when it first learns, a neurotypical baby, when it first learns how to, lift up its head, roll, crawl, walk, etc. There are very specific ways that it does this. And those are the motor control systems that they're talking about. And this developmental kinesiology is how this works, how this actually goes in succession. And if there's a problem in any of those areas, then there's problems later on downstream. And the same thing can be seen in adults as well. So what Dr. Kolar talks about is postural development occurs from proximal to distal. So in other words, it occurs from the core right out to the extremities. If you first think about how a baby is on his stomach, flat down, prone, and then by 2 or 3 months now it's able to lift its head up and then use its arms to lift its head up, right? That's the maturity coming from axial to appendicular. Dr. Kolar talks about posture and how what's kind of interesting is the eyes, the mouth, the chest, and the pelvis all should be horizontal and parallel. So if you look at the leftmost picture, that's what it shows. It shows everything is kind of parallel, and that's ideal. And anything else is not ideal, whether it's open from the front, closed in the front, etc. Another thing that I like that he talks about is how the diaphragm and pelvis are very similar in anatomy and function. If you look at the diaphragm, the breathing diaphragm, and the pelvic floor, they're kind of, even though these are cross sections, and obviously there's different stuff in them, but they kind of look the same. They have similar function in that they both act in respiratory function, in postural control. They both have sphincter function, and they work as a unit. When you're breathing, it works like this. It goes up and down and up and down and up and down. So that's an important thing to understand. When the dynamic neuromuscular stabilization people have talked about is how rolling is ipsilateral and crawling is contralateral. So if you look at the Olympics are going on right now, you look at the ipsilateral movements, that comes from rolling. So that's like kicking a soccer ball, doing a high jump, throwing a javelin, etc. So that's called an ipsilateral pattern. The contralateral pattern is more like crawling, right? And that's more like running, sprinting, obviously winter sports like skating, etc. But that's where all these things come from. So what happens, according to the DNS people, why is this pattern disturbed or interrupted? Because of one of several things. Either A, skeletal abnormality, you can see a little munchkin there on the top left, has uneven scapula, probably potential curve in his spine. Number 2, there's abnormal early development. You can see this little munchkin is having a hard time lifting their head up. Number 3 is some habits, whether it's some poor exercise routine like that person on the right is doing, or the person on in the middle there, who's on a computer screen looking down, right? There's all these different things that create these potential pathological patterns. And so what DNS talks about is how to stabilize these patterns. Looking at an adult, looking at even a child, and saying, how do we stabilize this? How do we improve the respiratory pattern? Because that's a big thing. How do we improve locomotion ipsilaterally and contralaterally? And how do we improve body awareness? So these are the posters that I was mentioning to you. So you have normally developing kids move perfectly according to their thought process. So if you look at the child illustrations on this, you see how each position they're moving perfectly, and we can mimic that in our adult or older child way. And this is how they're using the thought process. Either A, with an adult, can they go into these positions? Because if there's a weakness in those positions, that means there's probably weakness elsewhere. Or in a child, are they not doing those particular movements, and how can we facilitate them doing these movements? So these are the earlier movements, and these are the later movements. So the question is, what can we do to assess normal movement and fix abnormal patterns, right? So the goal in this particular paper, as an example, which I gave you the link for, and this is an incredible paper, and I highly recommend it. If you want to learn how to functionally stabilize these people, children or adults who are having some movement issues, there are like a whole bunch of tests that you can do. And when each one of these tests has a corresponding exercise for you to recommend. So this paper is an incredible paper, incredible resource for you guys. If you're interested in improving posture, but keeping in mind the nerve system, I think this would be very, very helpful, because the exercises, motion is lotion. The exercises are directed to help that person or that child move better. But first you assess where they're at, right? So I think there's 11 points, different tests, and you assess the 11 points and then figure out where they're weak and then start strengthening each one of those weaknesses. The great thing about this is that it gives you a long-term way to get them to work better. So instead of having to figure out individual by individual what to do, by doing these 11 exercises, you start at the earliest issue of exercise, and then you slowly work up. So it gives you like this long-term, like weeks and weeks and weeks worth of exercises to give your patient, which I think is phenomenal. And I always look for that kind of stuff versus just saying, here's an exercise. I just read another book by some functional neurologist. It was great, but they gave like 7 exercises that everybody gets. And I don't like that cookie cutter concept. I'd rather do like determination, like where are you at? And then let's do some exercises and then re-examine and do more exercises. This gives you this list of exercises to do over a multiple weeks' time. So as you guys know, I speak for the ICPA. Love to see you at one of our ICPA seminars. I've now recently just changed the name of my main seminar to brain-based adjusting. And we also have the pediatric midline defect seminars, and they're available not only live, but also virtually as well. And ChiroCast, I've just actually going to publish tomorrow my 572nd episode, and it's free on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, SoundCloud, anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can get our podcast called ChiroCast. So ultimately, we have to protect our future, adjust more kiddos. Thank you so much, ChiroSecure, for everything you do. Any questions about this, please do email me, because I'd love to talk to you. Thank you, and have a great day.
Today's Pediatrics show, Look to the Children, was brought to you by ChiroSecure.